Welcome back to Bandwagon fans. This is Jeff,
This is Renee.
and we are going to be. We started having a conversation off camera and decided it would be a good conversation to have on camera. We are going to be talking about Wonder Woman versus Captain Marvel. So, you already know the movie, so we're not going to get into that. We're gonna recap, kind of go back to a little bit to what you were saying earlier. So, Wonder Woman versus Captain Marvel. Tell me about your experience seeing Wonder Woman.
Okay, so I was telling Jeff, growing up, I did not have access to comic books. It wasn't even like my brother had them and I was sort of aware of them, but I kind of had a vague sense comic books existed. So I don't have a lot of attachment to the original storylines, and so I'm not interested necessarily in how they differ from what the original comics do. I'm looking at them purely from the movie's perspective. Right. Just that sort of like little disclaimer there. So, and in general, Marvel, I like from a storytelling perspective what Marvel is doing much more than the DC world, and I've seen those and I appreciate them for what they are, but from a storyteller, Marvel's much better. But that being said, I think the one film that came out of DC that I love unequivocally and would say that had a greater impact on me was Wonder Woman in comparison to Captain Marvel. So now part of the reason why is that it had been years of movies, like years of Spider-Man remakes, and I do not understand why Hulk needs to be made. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion we can have, right? So Spider-Man's Batman, the number of remakes Batman has, right? And no female superheroes. And I want a female. I've always wanted a female superhero, right? So
you had Catwoman. There was Supergirl.
Stop. End. No, those do not count within like
Elektra.
No. None of those count. None of them count in the sense that they were epic and that they were scale and that they reached the level of like the zeitgeist where everyone knew about them, right? Like those were very niche. Like who's Elektra? I had nowhere in my experiences as an everyday person in the world knew anything about Elektra, right? But Wonder Woman, we had that TV show, right? This hypersexualized and also very amazing Linda Carter. So then we get Wonder Woman. And I went to that film the day it opened. I went with several female friends. And the experience of seeing a woman on screen, that one moment even where she gets up onto the battlefield and she's got the shield and that like music swells, I think it was one of the most amazing cinematic moments like in history. And in that moment, like that, the fighting scenes I thought were shot so well that you could see what the action was. You could see that she was the one doing the actual, I don't know if it was the actual like actress, but just that they did it in a way that was shot so well that you could see Wonder Woman fighting. I cried, like me and several other female friends, we actually cried at that film because it was the first time we were seeing us up on the screen. And, that leaves aside all the stuff of being mixed race and people of color being outed, but just to have a woman on screen, like kicking ass, like that was, like I still can hear like music swelling in my heart right now. Like I feel it rising. So, but then we were talking about like if they had been released in reverse order, right? Like what if Captain Marvel had
come out first, and you say
no, it can't. It just can't. Because all right, so it can't because so you saw Wonder Woman, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are the things that appeal to both? What appeals to you about both of those films? So if you liked Wonder Woman, I don't know.
No, I did. I loved Wonder Woman. And I saw it, that and Captain America Civil War were the first two movies that I saw 3 times in the theater, like the first weekend.
Yep.
I loved Wonder Woman. I get choked up definitely the first couple times I saw it, possibly the third time. Yeah. However, as just for its cultural significance and for the first 2 acts, it still holds up. But the third act was a dumpster fire.
Wonder Woman?
Yeah, it was an absolute dumpster fire.
In what way? What way possibly was that a dumpster fire? Walking slowly through the fire? I don't really care what happened plot wise. There's the scene of her walking slowly through the fire, getting ready to destroy the god of war. I mean, I'm done. I don't know. Does that align with what they did in the? I don't know. It was perfection.
So, one really bland, generic CGI villain that had no interest. That was pulled out of their butt at the last minute.
Yes.
And yeah, it's in a whole bunch of other movies too. Iron Man had Warmonger, Hulk had Abomination.
All the Spider-Mans. Yes.
It's a bad trope of just introducing the villain in the third act, and it had that going against it. Over reliance on CGI and an obnoxious color palette that becomes hard to watch after multiple viewings. And it's actually the same criticism I have for the third act of Avengers Endgame.
Yeah,
I hate that color palette.
The really dark, like everything's been annihilated.
Everything's dark.
Yeah.
Everything's dark or red. It looks like Dante's Inferno drawn by a kid. So I didn't like that. And then there was Gal Gadot's performance was still good throughout the entire movie.
You bet it was.
So I still love her for it, but those two things make watching it over and over again harder and harder. And then knowing where they took the character in later movies, the whole relationship between her and it's not Steve Rogers, so Chris Pine played. I'm
one of the Chris's, like
yeah, but it's.
Is he a character from the comics then?
Yeah,
oh, okay.
Yeah. He was in the original Wonder Woman show too.
Oh,
Steve Trevor.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve Trevor is the longtime love interest of Wonder Woman.
Okay.
But there are certain things that happened in that movie, particularly. Okay, so Chris Pine, Steve Trevor sacrifices himself to save Wonder Woman, and that's all fine. But this took place in World War I, and 100 years later, she's still pining over the first man she ever saw. And that's a little unbelievable. So knowing where they took the character in later movies affects the way I watch Wonder Woman now.
Oh, right. Okay.
I think a demigod could get over Steve Trevor after 100 years.
I mean, he is Chris Pine, so I don't know.
Yeah, he's like the third best Chris. so, and then.
Okay, but do you?
And particularly in comparison to Captain Marvel, If you know anything about Wonder Woman, and I forget what his name is, but the guy who created Wonder Woman and did that drawing,
I know,
was really big into BDSM.
Yes.
And so Wonder Woman, the character and the way she's portrayed, is fetishized.
Right, but do you see that in the film? Right, like so.
Yes.
One of the big things
that's a super short skirt.
Well, I mean, but then also if they were to make the skirt longer, do you know what sort of flack they would have gotten for it not being true to the character? Right. So, but also I read this really amazing article talking about how the clothing within that particular film was very well done because it was meant for fighting. That they had done a really good job. It was like this whole blew up on this whole Twitter thing where this woman is a historian and also a fight expert. I don't know. I'm just pulling her credentials out of my ass. And she talked about how the costuming was actually superbly done for fighting. That it was really well done.
In a Greco-Roman style.
Yeah. Right. Yes. Exactly. Yes.
So
yeah.
So I get that. So again, like when I'm talking about Wonder Woman, this is nitpicking. Overall, I love the movie.
Right.
It's just that third act becomes the problems in the third act became harder and harder. It makes it harder and harder to rewatch the movie.
Okay.
Whereas with Captain Marvel, the more I watch it, the more I appreciate all the nuances in that movie. And every time I see it, I see something else that I missed on a previous view, and I've seen Captain Marvel now like almost 7 times.
And so I will agree that like I think one thing that Brie Larson is amazing about, like if you've seen her in Room or Short Term 12, which is actually the first movie I saw her in, she's very subtle. Like even that moment on the bus where she pushes the newspaper down and it's Stan Lee, and the look she gives him is like amazing. Just the sort of like charmed like.
Yeah.
But so superb. I think her performance was so subtle, and there are people out there who disagree on that, but I thought she did that really, really well. But purely from a superhero movie, what I as a woman would want in a superhero movie, I think she fits really well into the canon of superhero, really well into the canon of Marvel. But for that moment, that the cinematic element of her fighting, which came really late in the movie, and it also it was done with CGI and also done in a way that I don't get to see her doing it. Like I love that she's a superpower. I love that she's like invincible. Like my brother I was having a conversation with my brother, and he said that he's less interested in superheroes where they're immortal. Like there's no way to kill them, like Superman or
Right.
that like he's less interested in that than he is in like Batman or Spider-Man, the Spider-Man version of Spider-Man that
Right.
reconstructs his web, right? And I don't have. So he's like, I'm not interested in that type of stuff. And I love Captain Marvel because of that. Like, I like that she's just like a firebomb, right? And she can
Right.
just blow everything up. Because he was like, what would you do if you had a superpower? I was like, I'd want Captain Marvel's superpower. It's like, what would you do? I was like, I'd burn the world. Like, I would just set it aflame, right? So I like that. But purely from a movie perspective, I think Wonder Woman was better done for showcasing, like, women. And I like not every, I haven't talked to every woman in the world, but many of the women in my circle felt so moved by the attention to the female, particularly because the story within Wonder Woman is, she's like, I'm a woman, that's cool. What's the issue you guys have? And it's almost the reverse in Marvel, right? Because he's doing this thing, Jude Law's character, right, is basically gaslighting her the whole time.
Yeah.
He's undercutting her confidence, and she has these really cool female friendships, but it's about her sort of coming into her power. There was no, and so in that way, a man is still playing into the plot of that particular thing. And what I like about Wonder Woman is that she's the man. There was the romantic part of it, but purely from a hero perspective, there wasn't a man in it. It was about her, and it's her
In
still
Wonder
coming
Woman
into
or Captain?
in Wonder Woman, right? Like there's no man that's like. Except, you know, the god of war, but that's the villain, right? So like she comes into her power, but her sort of idea of who she is as a woman is never being undercut by a man. So I found that sort of rise, like it's still an origin film. It's still, both of them are origin films, right? And so I found the Wonder Woman more interesting that way because as a woman.
So this is kind of an interesting dichotomy. And I have to throw out one disclaimer. I'm not a woman. So
Right.
so it's kind of but I am well versed in feminist theory.
Right. Okay.
I can't live the experience of being a woman, but the latest wave of feminist theory is you don't necessarily have to be a woman because fourth wave feminism is dependent on the same forces that have been holding women back are holding everybody back.
Correct. Yes, men as well.
So it really focuses on the shared experience of everybody, even a 6'4" white male because the nature of the patriarchy is, it's not just that it's being dominated by men, but that it's a hierarchy in general.
Correct.
And any hierarchy would have the same effect, whether it's dominated by white men or Asian men or women. It's the nature of a hierarchical society.
Right.
So I'm going to apply feminist theory and feminist critique to both Wonder Woman and Captain Marvel.
Okay.
With the caveat that I am not actually a woman.
Okay.
So, but applying feminist theory, Wonder Woman is lackluster in a few ways. Whereas with Captain Marvel, every scene of that movie is shot and written and performed with feminism in mind. Particularly fourth wave feminism.
Okay, present your theory.
Okay, so you mentioned gaslighting, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that is so if you were to look at Captain Marvel, who is the villain? Who is the overriding villain of the movie?
I don't know their name. It's the Kree.
It's a trick question, right? So
right.
it is the Kree.
Right.
It's the entire society.
Yeah. Right.
It's not Jude Law.
No.
It's not the supreme being, it's the entire society. And you also brought up gaslighting, right? Which is typically used, originally, the original source of gaslighting was a play about a man gaslighting his wife by changing the temperature in their apartment every night.
And making her feel like she's crazy.
Right.
Right.
So it's although gaslighting can be done by anybody to anybody, we generally think of it as a tactic men use against women. Mm-hmm. So the fact that the whole movie was built around gaslighting and about rejecting this hierarchical, patriarchal society,
right.
The whole movie was written around this feminist critique of society. And then when you start with that and you start looking at specific moments, there's a moment where she's in the scroll ship right after she's getting her mind messed with, where she makes a point to grab her boots. And the first few times I saw that, it was just a funny moment, right, where she grabs her boots. Like the fourth time I realized that was a very deliberate, significant shot to point out that she's not wearing high heels. She is a soldier. She wears the uniform of a soldier. Not high. She's not running from a Tyrannosaurus Rex in high heels.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So
Right.
that's from little moments like that were from a feminist perspective. There.
Yeah. Yes, I agree. And this is kind of interesting because I think in theory, a lot of what you're saying, I won't disagree with. Like I agree that it was very smart that way. I like, and there was the whole hullabaloo about her in her having her hair cut, even though in the original comic Carol Danvers has short hair, right? Like, so then Brie Larson's character has short hair.
She's had different...
The hair, it kind of goes, but just this idea of that she's not a girly girl. I mean, I really love that. I like that. I don't think it doesn't, it's not that those things, it's not that it doesn't have those things, but there's still something it doesn't have in comparison to Wonder Woman.
And what is that?
I think really what it comes down to is that in many ways, Wonder Woman is free from all of the insecurities that women have. That when you grow up in this society, in a place where you are being undercut with microaggressions, not necessarily or specifically gaslighting, but to some extent gaslighting, you are, even at your best self, still undercutting your own self. There's still imposter syndrome. There's all these other things that sort of undercut your confidence as a woman, no matter, I think, how confident you are. Like, to think about being a confident person in the world, like purely confident person in the world, is like mind-boggling. And so when you have Wonder Woman who grew up separate from that and is confident in a way that sort of is beyond, it's like beyond Tony Stark almost, right? Like, there's a confidence that seems unshakable. That's the power I'm looking for. That's what I'm interested in as a woman. And Carol Danvers and like that whole story, I want her too. I think she's great, but she's not as interesting to me emotionally as Wonder Woman is because of that. Yeah.
All right. So I'm just going to try to. So what you're saying is the character of Wonder Woman just had no insecurities.
Yes.
And because of that, it was aspirational to you in a way that Captain Marvel wasn't.
Right.
Okay.
It was really painful to watch her be gaslighted. Like,
Yeah.
I didn't like that. It felt too real. I was like, God, that's just gross. And she's one more person it's happening to. And so in that sense, it was also interesting that that's what happened. But I didn't enjoy that as much.
So, and I can understand that. One of the reasons I prefer Captain Marvel, just in terms of a pure film,
Yeah.
is because it did build up. It built up to her she had something to overcome.
Yes. Right. There was a crescendo for that. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it was uncomfortable to watch. Especially, a lot of people wouldn't be bothered by that because they wouldn't even see it.
Right.
It would just go over their heads.
Yeah.
When you do recognize that sort of thing, it was uncomfortable to watch.
Yeah.
But that's what made it so satisfying when she overcame that.
Right,
And the line at the very end where I have nothing to prove to you.
Right.
Basically leads her into being like Wonder Woman.
Correct.
Where she has that supreme confidence, and then you see it in Endgame just how confident,
Right.
how confident she is.
Right. Right.
So whereas Wonder Woman didn't really have that development.
And I love that.
Yeah.
I liked that. I thought that felt so powerful to me. I found it great. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Fair enough. No.
Oh, okay.
So one other thing that I really, really appreciate about Captain Marvel was how it ended. So typically, there's so many movies where it ends with a fist fight, and whoever punches harder wins.
Yes, correct. Yes.
Captain Marvel, although she did the fist fights, and it really ended with a handshake.
Who? With whom?
You're
talking like the whole thing, not just the action.
No, the action. It ended with a handshake. Jude Law was defeated, and she held out her hand and took his hand. Right, and to me it was subverting the toxic masculine culture of saying everything is resolved by violence.
Right.
She resolved it by being so powerful that she doesn't need violence anymore.
Yeah.
So she took his hand, dragged him, and he knew he was defeated. So to me, that was also a little bit more powerful of an ending than just
yes. Than things blowing up.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree, but also slightly less cinematic, right? Like I liked that you talk about like her walking like in the fire, like just slow-mo walking in the fire, like I want to be able to walk down the street like that, right?
Right.
Like just slow-mo and there's fire burning behind me and I'm like, what? You're right. Like so yeah, I agree that was an interesting sort of subversion of that. And I think it fits really well into Marvel because I think Marvel's more interested in that type of sort of like looking at the different iterations of like what a superhero could be. But purely cinematically, Wonder Woman, like all the way.
All right. So, and again, I think for both of us, we're splitting hairs.
Right, exactly.
Both of us have very high opinions about both films.
I mean, right, exactly.
One of my particular biases when people start criticizing, when people criticize Captain Marvel, my hairs go up because of all the stuff that went into that movie.
Yes.
All the external stuff with Brie Larson's statement. So it's really hard to hear criticism of Captain Marvel and not hear underlying misogyny.
Yeah.
So so it is interesting. So as actually I think it was another Filmento video that I was just watching where they were comparing Captain Marvel to Wonder Woman, and it was the first time in the history of his channel that he took a DC movie over a Marvel movie.
Oh.
And I just disagree. So when you said you liked Wonder Woman more, I really wanted to explore that and see why, because I'm pretty sure you're not a misogynist.
I'm not. Why do you like Captain Marvel over other superhero films? Like, what is it about Captain Marvel that you like?
So for me,
like, where does it rank as far as the other superheroes films? Or maybe.
Okay, yeah. So I'll answer. You kind of asked a couple questions. I'll answer both of them. So, like we were talking about off camera before, when we go in to watch a movie, we take all of our experiences to it. Mm-hmm. So my years of studying being an anthropologist, studying liberal philosophy, studying philosophy in general, studying feminism, Captain Marvel was written for me. Mm-hmm. It was written in a language that I understand. Mm-hmm. So it was more meaningful to me because of the experiences I take into it. Mm-hmm. Whereas Wonder Woman, it didn't lean into that kind of political ideology as much. So that's probably the biggest reason why I like Captain Marvel so much, is because it fits my political leanings.
Sure.
Where do I rank it? If you're just talking MCU movies,
like any let's say, where does Captain Marvel fit for you in your like experiences with superhero films?
It is, and just in terms of it's probably like in the top 10.
Okay.
I've seen it more. I've spent more money watching that than any other movie in history.
That's good.
There's other movies that Captain America: Civil War impacted me probably a little bit more.
Sure.
Because it was 20 minutes of just well, actually more than that. The airport scene was 20 minutes of just sitting on your seats, just like, I can't believe I'm actually seeing this.
Yeah.
And then the final fight between Captain America and Steve and Captain America and Iron Man was so amazing, so emotionally fraught.
Correct.
Thor Ragnarok was not as impactful. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2 got to me. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I would put the very ending, the funeral scene. Yeah. Like if you don't cry at that, that's like old yellow territory. But Captain Marvel, I would put emotionally, it had more of an impact for me than all but a handful of movies.
Okay. And why? What was it? What is it about that one that sort of ranks up there?
About Captain Marvel? Mm-hmm. Because of my politics.
Because what you brought to it.
Yeah, because of my politics. So
yeah.
And every time I see it, I'm noticing something different. Mm-hmm. And so that for me the highlight is the scene where she rejects the Supreme Intelligence and she stands up and she realizes just what her full power is. Yeah. And it's going to get me every time I see it.
I mean, I agree. I just burn it all down to the ground, right? Like I get that, and also even in when she shows up in Endgame and just like plows through a ship, right? Like something's entered the lower atmosphere and she just plows through a ship. I'm like, that's right. You know, like I like her being in this world, right?
Yeah.
And there was some rumor that she's going to be the leader of the next version, the next iteration of it. But I don't know how. I mean, that's all just.
That's kind of where we think it's going to go, or there are people that follow us think it's going to go, but nobody knows.
Right.
Nobody knows what's going to happen with in the future. The movie made $1.2 billion or $1.1 billion, some in that neighborhood.
Right.
So.
Where does that rank amongst the other Marvel films?
Amongst MCU, I think it's at number 7.
Okay.
Off the top of my head,
it's still high, but it's not.
It's right underneath Black Panther.
Oh, okay.
So
I imagine all the ensemble ones make the most money,
yes.
Right? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So in terms of a debut, in terms of a debut, never before seen in another movie superhero, it's actually number 1 of all time. It made more than Iron Man, made more than any of the Batman movies.
Get out, really?
Or origin of the
origin films, right? Exactly.
So it's a financial success. Disney as a company and Marvel Studios in general is leaning really, really hard into SJW politics. They are unabashedly embracing transnational, multicultural, transgender.
Yeah.
I say unabashedly. When it comes to homosexuality and transgender, they are flirting with it.
Oh yeah.
And there's very good chance that Captain Marvel will be the first openly gay superhero.
Captain Marvel?
Yeah.
Is she in the comic books?
I'm not sure if she is in the comic books or not.
Okay.
But one of the things that's interesting about Captain Marvel versus Wonder Woman is there was no love interest.
Yes.
It was implied.
Yes.
You could read it.
Yes.
You could apply queer theory and suggest that she had a previous relationship with Maria Rambeau.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
I think that was true.
Yeah.
They're like wank. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
And it's unfortunate they didn't at the end just actually acknowledge that they had this previous relationship. It's really unfortunate they didn't. But hopefully by the time her sequel comes out, it's just straight up she's gay. Hopefully.
They aren't going to do that.
You don't think so?
No, because then I read an article a long time about this is that I think they will continue to hint at those types of things, but they're not going to come right out and say it, because then it gets censored in other parts of the world, and it gets censored, and then you lose out all that money.
So Avengers Endgame had an openly gay character, and it was not an issue in China.
Which openly gay character was that?
Not so in the scene where Captain Marvel is doing the group therapy. I think it's one of the directors, either Joe or Anthony Russo. I think it was Joe Russo was talking about a date with a man.
Oh, but is that a superhero character?
No, not a superhero. But it isn't. But it was the first openly gay character in a superhero movie.
Oh wow, I had not realized that the significance of that.
And it flew in China.
Okay.
It was just fine.
I don't. They're not going to do it. I just don't think they're that cool.
Yeah.
Honestly, we'll see.
Yeah, well, we don't know. We'll find out.
I'm voting for it. I mean, I would love that, right? I would love for it to be more people, more characters, more color, more just all of that to represent. Right. Give us a superhero with a disability. Give us something that speaks to other people who can come into their own power. And so, we're just barely getting women. I can't even tell you how excited I am about Star Wars. I cannot wait. I waited my whole life for a female Jedi. I waited my whole life. I'm so excited I just love that it's coming and we might get one, and everyone's like, no, they had that one woman and there's the one female Jedi and then she's killed in the first, one of the prequels, you know what I mean? Apparently she's the one with the horn. I don't know. All I'm saying is we've not had a female Jedi and I can hardly wait. Yeah.
So
all that stuff.
It's not set up this way now. But for a while, I had The Last Jedi. The only 2 movies I had where you could see the cover was The Last Jedi and Sorry to Bother You.
Yeah.
And that was intentional. Because there's a lot of people that don't share your view on a female Jedi.
I know.
Yeah.
But I will say this. I think separate from comics, I didn't get to grow up reading comics. There's a lot of reasons for that. Some of it was I was reading Jane Eyre, but I did have access to Star Wars. I had it. My brother had the toy. I mean, it was part of our family. It's part of who we were, And I had Barbie, and then I'd have like Luke Skywalker. I mean, like they interacted with my own toys. They were that was epic. We had the Millennium Falcon. Like we had it all. And so that experience is, I think, going to be even like off the chart in comparison for me personally, like even separate from Wonder Woman. Like Wonder Woman, I knew kind of in passing, and I'm very excited about it. But I have history and passion for Star Wars. That to see this come into fruition, I don't know if I can contain myself. So
that could be a whole. So real quick, totally different subject. So Last Jedi.
Yeah.
Just snapshot overall opinion of it.
So The Last Jedi was the last one, right?
Right.
Okay. All right. So I think one of the things they've done with it's not a reboot. I don't know exactly how we're calling them, like the new versions, right?
Relaunch. We'll call it a relaunch.
Yeah, the relaunch. In some ways, it was interesting because I felt they were really playing on setting up a parallel sort of trajectory for the hero, right? So they're setting up this parallel trajectory. But I think Last Jedi did a really good job of undercutting that. One of the things that I had read was talking about how the Mark Hamill had expressed some frustration about his role in the film because he wanted it to be, he acted it well, but he wanted it to be whatever it was, he wanted it to be different.
Right.
But the director was like, we don't want another training montage. Like we don't need another, running through the swamp, training to be a Jedi. Like we need to subvert that. We need to try to do a different path towards that. And I felt like that was when it actually shifted into something that was more interesting than the setup. It made it more interesting to me than what they had originally promised.
Yeah. So Mark Hamill's quote about Mark Hamill saying, "I disagree with everything you're doing with this character," is probably in 5 million The Last Jedi videos, and I don't think many people actually follow up where Mark Hamill ended up saying, "But once I saw what he was doing, right. I had to agree with it."
Right.
But Mark Hamill's also I think he's gone kind of back and forth with how he views The Last Jedi. I loved it. I thought it was.
I did too.
I thought it was such an interesting movie. I'm worried about J.J. Abrams coming back.
Tell me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, because the more I think about J.J. Abrams, the less interested I am in him and his stupid mystery boxes. But we'll see. I was just kind of curious what you thought about The Last Jedi.
Yeah.
But that would be a whole separate conversation.
We'll have to come back and do that one.
All right, so we're going to go ahead and kind of wrap this up. It was interesting to hear your perspective on Wonder Woman.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
So everybody that prefers Captain Marvel, or everybody that prefers Wonder Woman to Captain Marvel, is a raging misogynist, except for you. No. So it was interesting to hear that. I wanted to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that. So
that's cool.
Yeah. So thanks for being on.
All right.
And that was our discussion of Captain Marvel, Wonder Woman, and a few other random topics.
Things, yeah.
So thanks for watching, and I'm Jeff.
I'm Renee.
Get on the bandwagon.